There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you stop explaining yourself, stop chasing clarity, and simply go still. And in that silence, something powerful begins to happen inside her mind. Not because you're playing a game, but because silence speaks a language most people were never taught to understand. Welcome to Prismologic. I'm Anastasia. And if this conversation resonates with you, take a second to like the video and subscribe, not for the algorithm, but so this space continues to exist for men who want depth, not drama. Many men believe attraction is built through constant presence, text, reassurance, availability, emotional proof. And while consistency matters, over-availability quietly erodes mystery, polarity, and respect. When you go silent, not cold, not cruel, just grounded and self-contained, you interrupt a pattern her nervous system has grown used to. And the mind hates interrupted patterns. Female psychology is deeply responsive to emotional contrast. When everything is predictable, the mind rests. When something changes without explanation, the mind searches. Silence creates a psychological vacuum, and the mind, especially an emotionally invested one, rushes to fill it. She starts asking questions she didn't ask before. Did I say something wrong? Is he pulling away? Is he reevaluating me? Notice what's happening. Your silence doesn't push her away. It pulls her inward, toward self-reflection, toward emotional recalibration, toward awareness of your value. This isn't about manipulation. It's about energetic balance. When you stop performing, stop over-explaining, stop chasing emotional outcomes, you return to your center. And that shift is felt even if it's never spoken. Here's the part most men miss. Silence only works when it's authentic. Forced silence feels heavy. Strategic silence feels anxious. But grounded silence, silence rooted in self-respect, purpose, and emotional regulation, feels calm. And calm is deeply disarming. When you're no longer reacting, she begins observing. When you're no longer explaining, she begins interpreting. And when you're no longer chasing connection, she begins wondering where she stands. The male nervous system that is regulated, self-directed, and emotionally steady sends a powerful signal. I am not controlled by fear of loss. And that signal does something profound. It awakens curiosity, it activates emotional investment, it shifts power dynamics without a single word. Silence, when used unconsciously, destroys connection. Silence, when used consciously, reveals truth. And what it reveals about her emotions, her attachment, and your position in her inner world is far more honest than anything words could ever give you. When you go silent, something subtle but important happens inside her emotional system. The noise stops, the external stimulus fades, and without realizing it, she's left alone with her own thoughts about you. This is where the mind becomes loud. Most emotional bonds are maintained through reassurance loops. Messages, reactions, shared moments, emotional feedback. When those loops pause, the brain doesn't interpret it as neutral. It interprets it as meaningful, especially when the connection mattered. Her mind begins replaying interactions, your tone, your words, your absence. She starts measuring emotional distance not by what you said, but by what you're no longer doing. And here's the key psychological truth. The mind assigns value to what it fears losing. This is why silence often intensifies emotions rather than erasing them. Not because you disappeared, but because you stopped feeding certainty. For many women, emotional security is tied to emotional visibility. When you were present, expressive, and responsive, she felt oriented. When that suddenly changes, the emotional compass spins, and the brain rushes to restore balance. She may feel confusion before desire, anxiety before longing, curiosity before clarity. These emotions are not signs of weakness. They're signs of emotional investment, waking up. And this is where men often misunderstand what's happening. They assume silence works because it creates panic. It doesn't. Panic fades quickly. What lasts is introspection. She begins asking deeper questions, not just about you, but about herself in relation to you. Why does his absence affect me this much? Why do I care more now than before? What changed inside me? Silence removes distraction. And when distraction disappears, attachment reveals itself. But there's a condition most men overlook. This only happens if your presence had weight to begin with. Silence amplifies significance. It does not create it. If you were inconsistent, needy, or emotionally chaotic, silence feels like relief. But if you were grounded, attentive, and emotionally safe, silence feels like loss. And loss sharpens focus. Your calm absence forces her nervous system to regulate without you. And during that process, the emotional bond either strengthens or dissolves. Silence doesn't manipulate outcomes, it exposes reality. This is why emotionally mature men don't fear silence. They trust it because they're not using it to provoke a reaction. They're using it to return to alignment with themselves. And alignment is attractive in a way. Words can never be. When you stop reaching outward for validation, something inside her reaches inward for meaning. And that shift, quiet, invisible, undeniable, is where the mind begins to change its story about you. There is a difference between silence that heals and silence that harms. And understanding that difference is what separates emotionally grounded men from men who disappear hoping to be missed. Healthy silence is not withdrawal, it's containment. You are still emotionally present, but no longer emotionally reactive. You're not withholding affection to control outcomes. You're protecting your inner stability. This kind of silence communicates something powerful without ever saying it. I am okay with myself. And that message lands deeply. When a man can sit in silence without anxiety, without rushing to fix emotional tension, without chasing reassurance, it signals emotional maturity. And emotional maturity creates safety, even when it creates uncertainty. Her mind begins recalibrating how she experiences you. Instead of seeing you as a source of constant emotional input, she begins to experience you as a steady emotional reference point. Someone who doesn't panic, someone who doesn't collapse under emotional pressure. And here's something rarely spoken about female psychology. Emotional depth is often revealed during pauses, not conversations. In the quiet, she notices how your absence feels in her body, whether it creates calm, tension, longing, or indifference. And those sensations inform her attachment far more honestly than logic ever could. Silence also removes performative connection. There are no words to lean on, no validation to absorb, no emotional scaffolding. What remains is the truth of the bond. For some women, this brings clarity. For others, discomfort. But clarity is not your enemy. Clarity is what saves you from emotional confusion, mixed signals, and one-sided effort. Men who are afraid of silence often overextend. They explain too much. They give too soon. They chase emotional resolution instead of emotional alignment. And over time, that erodes attraction, not because they are bad men, but because they abandon their own center. Silence restores that center. It allows your nervous system to settle, your emotions to stabilize, your self-respect to come back online. And when you return to yourself, something shifts in how she perceives you. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You're choosing whether the connection meets your standards. And that internal shift is felt immediately. This is why silence often brings messages back. Not because she's panicking, but because she's checking emotional reality. Re-establishing connection, testing whether the bond still exists. And when you respond from calm, not urgency, the dynamic changes. She senses emotional leadership, not dominance, not control, leadership through stability. Silence doesn't make you powerful. Self-regulation does. Silence is simply the space where that self-regulation becomes visible. When you understand silence, you stop using it as a tactic and start experiencing it as a mirror. A mirror that reflects not only her emotional state, but your own. The most profound shift happens when you realize this. Silence does not work because it affects her. It works because it recenters you. And from that centered place, everything else reorganizes naturally. A man who can be quiet without resentment, without calculation, without emotional hunger, becomes psychologically grounded. He is no longer pulled by fear of abandonment or driven by the need to be chosen. He is present but not attached to outcomes, and that emotional posture is rare. From her perspective, this creates contrast. She senses that you are not trying to manage her feelings. You are not performing stability, you are stable. And that stability creates a new emotional environment, one where she must meet you, not be carried by you. This is where respect deepens. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet respect that comes from knowing a man can stand in uncertainty without collapsing into control or withdrawal. She feels that you are emotionally sovereign, that your sense of self does not depend on constant affirmation. And here's the truth most men need to hear. Whether she leans in or pulls away after your silence is not the point. The point is that you finally see the connection clearly. If she reaches out with curiosity, warmth, or reflection, the bond evolves. If she fades without awareness, the silence saved you time, energy, and emotional confusion. Either way, you win. Not because you played it right, but because you stayed aligned with yourself. This is emotional leadership, not through words, not through force, but through presence. Men often think attraction is about saying the right thing. But attraction is far more about what you don't say, the pauses you allow, the space you don't rush to fill, the calm you hold when emotions fluctuate. Silence teaches you patience. It teaches emotional restraint. It teaches discernment. And these qualities don't just change how women experience you, they change how you experience relationships. You stop chasing connection and start evaluating compatibility. You stop fearing distance and start trusting your center. You stop needing validation and start offering presence. And presence, real presence, is what creates depth. Silence is not absence, it is clarity. And clarity is the foundation of every healthy, powerful connection.